Thank you so much for coming this evening. I had these 3 talks with Open Circle and had intended in having them be different topics, and it's just clear that the topic of surrender is really, really key. So here we are again. Some of us have seen before at some of the other talks. So yeah, you know, and every time I speak, there's always something different that's present. So what I'm present with today with the surrender is the absolute love and joy of surrendering, and that you know, when we understand what surrender is, that we're surrendering into something larger than what we are currently present with, and that we're surrendering into ourself, then all the stories around surrender become irrelevant. So I was speaking a lot in the other talks about kind of techniques for surrender, which seem to be useful, and I've shared them, and then people who've heard them ask and say they want to hear it again. So I think there's a place where the mind is yeah, you know, where something just doesn't stick, you know, it just keeps falling through because the mind is thinking that it needs to do something and is really kind of working at this surrender thing. So everyone has had experiences of surrender, and I'll often speak about it in terms of a muscle, right? That when you grasp something, you know that feeling of a contracting happening to hold, and then you know the sensation of letting go of that contraction and a release. So that sensation is really useful because it feels really similar on the emotional level or even the mental level, when we emotionally an experience starts to form itself, something happens, and you know, the emotion starts to rise, whether it's anger starting to rise, or irritation, or joy, or excitement, right? We can feel that rising out of nothing. It wasn't there before. Something happens, an experience, and then an emotion just rises out of nothing. And if we adhere to it, if we attach to it, it has that same quality of the contracting fist holding. So excitement, you know, the body starts to latch on to then excitement and holds it, or any kind of experience. And if we're not attaching to it, it naturally releases back to nothing. So something simple, you might notice, oh, that is a gorgeous flower. And then you walk by and it's gone. So that movement of arising into being, or that coming into a form and the letting go, is just happening naturally. There's not an attachment going on with it. You can notice the flower, notice its beauty, and then have another thought, oh, my flowers aren't that beautiful, or, you know, or I wish there were more flowers, or, you know, it's like we can have thoughts about this arising and carry a story on in our head, but the natural arising was being with the beauty of this flower, and then it's falling away. So when we are identifying with something, that rising happens, the contracting around it happens, and then we get fixated on it. So I was speaking about emotionally, and then thought form, right? We all understand when we get obsessed about something and it's the same story, just repeating itself over and over and over again, right? That's the same as like that contraction in the mind. And all of these contractions can happen just in the moment of daily living, and can also be held for a really long time. And when they're held for a long time, they create a form in different aspects of your consciousness, whether physical or energetic or more subtle. And when I speak about surrendering, I'll address the day-to-day surrendering as a place to play and practice, so that when the deeper contractions come forward, there's a practice with being with the letting go part. So when it happens during the day, there's that sense of the arising, the contracting, the letting go, or just the arising and letting go. And when you find them in your system that have been held, they're already in that fixated place. They're already tight. And so if you've practiced during the day, noticing what that letting go part feels like, when you find the contracted state, then you can be present with the letting go, that what it feels like to let go. So I've never thought of myself as someone teaching about techniques, but the more that I speak about this, I realize, oh, there is a practice. And this is continually useful for me personally in all these different stages that continue to unfold. This surrendering is always useful. It's just always useful. It just continues. So I'll speak about 3 different places of surrendering. One is in the moment when it's happening, right? You notice you're about to yell at someone who's driving, dangerously, or you have a judgment about it, right? So you can practice that letting go in the moment. So that kind of surrendering. The surrendering when you meet an identified moment that's been held for a long time, is that kind of practice of surrendering. And then the next layer that has come forward for me is functions of consciousness, functions of identity, and surrendering through those. And that the practice, in my unfolding, there was a moving through those different stages, so that when I came to places of I am, or the consciousness of the will, or the consciousness of purpose, or the consciousness of the places that directs us, that inner compass, there was a curiosity of what happens if I surrender through those. And so surrendering then became a play through these different functions of existence. So it's useful to be with the day-to-day ones just to practice and play. And then you can support the deeper releasing of conditioning by applying that awareness of the letting go with the deep places of contraction. And then you can also do that with I am, the sense of self, the will, all these different parts of our being that make the car work, make the whole game, the game play well. So does that make sense so far? Is my language making sense? Okay.
Yes. And will you be going deeper into what you mean? Or are you just...
I don't know where we're going to go. We'll find out together if that's I would assume so. I was a priceless face. I don't know if any of you saw that, but it was priceless. If the camera swiveled better, I would have So the easiest thing to do is to really point to your own experience that you're already familiar with. As far as me pointing to things, right? To point to, if we use, it's just easy, the whole car thing, because judgments about other people's driving can happen really, really quickly, partly because one can feel like one's life is in danger, right? So there's the survival mechanism gets kicked in, and then a judgment and the whole protective, the whole kind of thing can get engaged. But I think it's a great example of, if something happens when you're driving and there's that instantaneous rising of rage or judgment, or fear, right? Because when we're driving, we're aware that our minds are kind of soft and maybe there's thinking happening, and so something sudden that you weren't expecting shows up, so that the example of having that emotional response just suddenly appear out of nowhere and rise up to grab you is clear. And how long does it stay? Right? Do you hold on to that for the rest of the day, talking about that, stupid driver? Or does it arise in the moment and then actually it just lets go? There's a breath or a release or a phew or a wow or, so noticing that sensation, right? Just noticing that sensation. And ultimately there's no doing in either one, but you can notice the sensation of it. And that just so that beginning place of noticing the letting go part. Right? So there's no doing in either one. The emotion arises and either the mind latches on or the nervous system latches on because it was threatening, so maybe the nervous system kicked in. So you can just notice those different levels and what that feels like in the letting go. It's also a good example because it's not so personal, right? If something happens in relationship or at work, it can be harder to untangle the story of what's true, what's yours, what's theirs, what should you hold on to, what should you let go of, right? You can get caught up in all these different stories. So the driving thing is easy because it can kind of just give a nice clean example of that quality, of that rising and the letting go. So does everyone have a felt sense inside of what I'm speaking about? Can you just raise your hand so I can get a sense of who's getting seeing? Okay. So let's do another example. So why don't you just see what comes to your mind to pick, what appears to do this with. So what I'd like to do is have you be with something where there's a contraction already. Something that bugs you, about your partner or family member or friend or something, or whatever comes up for you, something that has that contraction already in it. They, whatever, right? That feeling. And let's just see if together we can be with that letting go, that softening state with whatever that story is. And let's see what happens here. It's almost like taking a breath and exhaling. When we've held on to it, there's often a thought component, emotional component, and physical component. And in the exhale, if it doesn't surrender itself, it may be that each of those three parts wants to be tended to individually. And that it's through it's partially through the weaving of these aspects of ourselves that reality gets created. So when we're in an experience that's being identified with, there's a thought that's being believed, an emotion that's being believed, as ultimately real, and then the physical body has a corresponding response. So and any one of those doorways can be most useful for helping something to surrender. So, or helping you, whatever words, you to surrender, it to surrender, surrendering itself, right? Words are language that creates other, doesn't work so well. But so you can find a location in the body where the contraction is also present. So it might be that, if you're feeling blame towards someone, you can feel that quality of blaming in the heart or in the gut or, behind your left shoulder blade, or, these different places in the body, because they're not separate from each other. So there's a reflection of the contraction through each layer. So I think it's useful to go through these. So you can, we'll do both of these at the same time. So you can just rest with the letting go with the situation that's come forward for you, and we can talk about it. And you can also do that with a sensation in the body that's connected with the story, and so you can either do both with the same story or different stories, or just one. Just I want to give a couple of options so that as you sit with this, there's a couple of pathways to play with. And I'd love to hear if anyone has anything to report on how what's happening. Yeah.
Do I use a mic?
No, it's only, it doesn't matter to me. Yeah, what? Do you have one? Why don't you go ahead while he tries to find it, yeah.
Something that I keep feeling contraction around at a very basic level is humanity's relationship to water and what's happening to our water. And I notice that I can surrender, like I have this contraction come up around that, and I notice I can surrender, and I still want a solution. I still really want something to improve regarding our relationship to our water.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious about that. I mean, because I know that part of my contraction is this pain around what's happening, and then resistance.
So one of the things that's just kind of remarkable for me about this is that there's more for you to surrender through there. So because there's still story happening, right? There's still an idea about the water and the earth and what should or shouldn't, or all of that. So in this unfolding that happens through the mental, emotional, and physical layers, the unfolding, it can be through these different, it doesn't have to be linear. So it may be that there's the thought appears. So that this is actually sort of the next step. So I still want to go back to having people share, but I'll just, the next step is then being with the layers that come up and noticing, okay, here's this thought, right? And surrendering the thought, and then being with the emotion that comes up and surrendering through the emotion. Being with the physical response, surrendering through that. Another thought appears. Then you get to the next layer underneath. And then the same thing just continues to happen until you keep unraveling the story through to truth, through to source, whatever word you want to use. So so that's what I would just say to continue. And I'll talk more about sort of the surrendering in a little more detail, what I mean by that. But the first practice that makes sense to me is that sense of the contraction and the quality, that sense of letting go, because we all know that. There's another kind of level of surrendering that appeared for me after that, which I'll get into, but in between that part that I'll get into and this relaxing, the contracting, relaxing sensation, in between those is the inquiry and being with each of the layers as they come up to unravel, unpack the story. Because it's the weaving of those that creates reality the way we perceive it. And as we surrender through those, then the whole thing changes. Yeah. So I'd just love to hear if that was, what happened for people, and just kind of sit, go ahead.
Yes, I can relate it to electrically sensitive, and it becomes, I can feel it on all the levels, emotionally really. The body constantly feels tortured and assaulted. I feel isolated, I feel, just a whole story. I hadn't even seen it as a story, but to surrender to that, it's like surrendering constantly. It's surrendering to all those feelings. So isolation, torture, pain, being alienated. They must be on very deep levels.
Right.
Why me kind of thing. Nothing makes sense. Needing to let go completely. It's, it makes sense, and I can see how I can follow this through.
Yeah, you picked a big one.
I picked a big one. I feel like, what did I put my hand up for? It was this.
It's perfect.
What is this canary?
No, it's perfect. And I want to just acknowledge the vulnerability and the strength that's totally there together, right? You're speaking of vulnerability, and strength is what's speaking the vulnerability.
Absolutely.
So strength is right there.
And I know it, and it feels to be aware of everything in the world falling apart and still have a connection with joy, is pretty amazing. And that is the surrender, and it's just, but there's more deep layers to surrender. I know and this is what I'm seeing right now with you.
All right.
And to get there, to touch them, to get a sense of dissolving whatever is there. It doesn't even feel like it's just mine. It's like, it's collective even.
Right.
Oh boy, I'm really going through that.
Right. Well, if you just ground in your body for a second, because all these layers are happening at the same time, and when the physical body tries to process 100,000 bodies, it's too much.
Too much, yeah.
It's too much.
Exactly.
So let yourself go back into that alignment through the dimensions above, and let the dimensions that know it's collective manage that part. That's not right there. It's all happening at the same time, and it is all you. But each of the layers function in their own field.
I can feel the release of that.
Great, great, great.
I didn't even realize that's, before I said it, that I was thinking that. Yeah.
Right. And one of the things that's been, or continues to be kind of mind-blowing for the small mind, you know, in this whole path that's unfolding in my experience, is all these different layers, and it just keeps going. So there's the I that created universes, that's processing the choices that it made in creating universes. So depending on the level that you're opening up to, there's story everywhere. And there's nothing wrong with story. The universe is one massive story. It's like we're the living story. So when we start to get overwhelmed from feelings that are too big, often it's a smaller part of consciousness is trying to digest and process a larger part. And if we recognize that, it can help us organize ourselves in the magnitude of what we are, and then the small parts can just manage the small parts there that they can manage, you know, and then the large parts can manage the large parts. I don't know if I'm making any sense. I haven't talked about this so much, but so example would be individual personal mind navigating your own bills and, you know, finances and and then the mind of the soul navigating I gotta be quiet to finish that sentence. I can't separate out the mind and the different parts of the field when I'm speaking about the soul. So soul consciousness, not just managing one lifetime, but managing the lessons that it's learning and unfolding through all of the lifetimes. So the mind navigating your taxes and you're paying your bills on time, right? It has its sort of jurisdiction in a way, and then the soul consciousness has its jurisdiction, and the God self has its jurisdiction, and then I don't have names for all these things, but, you know, the universal God creators has their jurisdiction, right? And so when that sense of I am, and it's all one I am, singular I am, and these senses of self are created for function, for function and expression and experience, love, joy, exploration. So these senses of self are created for the whole thing to function. And for me, one aspect of waking up is that the sense of self wakes up to the larger I am, but continues to do that through all these layers of itself. And when an overwhelm is starting to happen, that's really clearly understood, oh, one sense of self is feeling the seamlessness of itself in a larger place and trying to process a larger reality in a smaller one, and it comes up the works, it's harder. So just sort of recognizing that and breathing and allowing everything to sort itself out, for me, makes it easier. And if I jump a little bit into speaking of the surrendering piece that I said would be the next part, when there's a felt sense of the recognition that every I am is the same I am, there can be a greater sense of trust in the surrender. And so when one hits these massive emotions, whether it's this massive trauma about what's happening on the earth, or a massive experience of violation by frequency, you know, or a massive grief of loss of whatever, like these massive feelings, they are massive because they're in this larger capacity of self. And when the small self, identified self, recognizes that, it can create the environment. It's not the right word. I want conditions. It can create the conditions that make it feel safer to surrender. So when you're feeling an intensity of longing or betrayal or jealousy or terror, and it feels infinite, well, it is infinite because you are infinite. And so it can create a willingness to fall through that infinite terror, infinite agony, because you're infinite, and it's an infinite. It's a game. I'll talk about crayon colors. It's a crayon color of God. So the feeling of being invaded by frequency, there's a story there, but the sensation of that is also, it's painting, it's God painting. So it's like surrendering through into the color of green, or blue, or gray, or the shades of brown, or pink. So I'm kind of like throwing in a lot here, but I'll also relate to these different experiences that we have, these feelings, as fabric or paint colors, crayon colors, and that if everything is God, then everything is safe. And if I recognize it as that fabric, it also makes it feel safer to fall into. Every experience that's created that feels terrible, when you surrender through it, you come into a deeper recognition of the truth. When I started doing the healing work that just kind of started to come forward on its own, I was seeing much smaller perspective in the beginning, but I would see people's thoughts and emotions in their body and see where the contractions were. And throughout the session, I would stay steady with whatever was present, and whatever the painful story was, when it was met with truth, it always surrendered into something that was beautiful. Always. And so these colors, these paint or crayons, are what's being felt and seen. But when you surrender through them, you get to what is perfect and true and infinitely gorgeous. And so the willingness to feel anything, the willingness to be anything, for me, was also what was the conditions that allowed me to keep surrendering through and to get closer to whatever was hurting. So I'm sorry if I'm like bombarding you with so many things. They're all just like kind of coming out, and we'll sort it out after. So this other piece about the surrendering, for me, there was a fierce willingness that is what served. So when I felt anything that was really uncomfortable, the mind knew that it was safe. The mind knew this is God too. This has to be safe. And then the emotional body found itself resting in fierce willingness to get really close to whatever was coming forward. And those two together supported the surrendering in this other way. So when I was referring to this other part, I'm just gonna go into this other part. So in the beginning I was speaking about that experience of the contracting and the letting go, and then meeting the rising and the natural releasing, and then the next part about being with something that's already contracted, and opening to that sensation of the relaxing with something that's already contracted, right? To practice that. And so this other piece of surrendering that's just been profoundly useful is being with everything as this fabric, as this color of God, with the trusting that this must be God too, being present with it as a fabric and a sensation, and this fierce willingness to be it. If God is everything, and if I am everything, then I am that horrifying experience, and being fiercely willing to be that. And I don't mean collapsing into it and getting lost in it. This surrendering is more of a sense of fully meeting to fall through the doorway of it into the truth of what you are. So it's where we've identified, right? Consciousness is just playing this massive masquerade game with itself. So it's everything. We are everything. There's no separation. And we get to have these experiences by believing things are separate. And there is a distinction. Purple looks and feels different than red. So there's a distinction, but all those colors of the rainbow come out of pure light. So they're not separate. They just get to have their distinction. And so when I'm feeling through or falling through or surrendering through or into, or it's like surrendering through purple to white. Surrendering through grief to God. Surrendering through jealousy to that pureness of being. So the flavor, the fabric itself is the pathway back, because they're not separate from each other. And so when we trust that you're just falling back into yourself, smaller part of you is falling back into a larger part of you, which will catch you because it's you. And the more we fall back in that way, we open to larger and larger aspects of our consciousness, and can fall back into the experience of absolute nothing and disappear. And yet the game continues. So the I am reappears. Because it's fun. So it seems to me we're at this incredible place in the experience of time of contracted phases all being met with higher frequencies, where we're shifting from a condensing phase to an opening phase. And so all of our contracted experiences and identities are all being met with this light and being called to let go. So there's a lot of pain because of a backlog of pain that hasn't been fully experienced. Let me just offer another piece here too. I didn't think I had anything to say tonight. I'm just like running at the mouth. Our whole system is made to experience and let go. Everything is a reflection of this divine truth. So appearing and disappearing is our nature. creation and disappearance, right? Appearing, disappearing. And so everything is a reflection of that. And if one stays steady, resting as presence, then experience arises, and even if it's painful, if one is steady with it, it resolves itself, because that's how we're made. We're made to do that. It's when we've come into separation and are identified and protecting ourselves in time and space with fear. I want to make sure that thing doesn't happen again, or I don't ever want that to happen, or we're splitting ourselves. And it's through that splitting that we create form and identification with an experience. So when we rest as presence, our nature is for things to resolve and rest in that. So as one continues to meditate, things come up. I mean, there's the whole spiritual bypassing thing where people are opening through a transcendent mind and not tending to all the emotional material and physical things that are all related to the process. So I'm not speaking about that because that's not actually that's not integrated. But when we rest in presence with everything, including our emotional body, including our physical body, resting is that, things want to come up because they want to resolve. So if they haven't had their full moment in time, they're held on to, waiting till that happens. And it's as simple as if something, even a painful or traumatic experience happened when you were young and you couldn't process it. It was too much for the consciousness to process, so it gets held somewhere until there's the right opportunity, for it to come forward and then resolve. So I just wanted to add that piece about, because so much of what I'm speaking about has this sense of doing, right? Of being with and relaxing and this part, like I'm speaking to all these different parts. But we also can get a sense of all those different parts and how they are in relation to each other, which is really useful for a well lubricated system, where things aren't getting caught or held on to. But it's important to just name that the whole system is made for healing to be constant. So that healing isn't actually a separate thing from being. It's not a separate thing from presence. It's not a separate thing from the moment, from now. And as we come into this presence, the system wants to do that. It just naturally starts presenting the things that have been held on to, that are conditioned, that are wanting to let go. And it can be helpful in the midst of resting in that stillness, that when something comes up that grips you so intensely that you have no idea how to stay steady with it, it can be helpful to have a few tools in your bag to be with that. So when you come up with, bottomless grief, right? Well, how are you going to deal with bottomless grief? Right? Well, bottomless is just another flavor. We're believing it's actually bottomless. It's just the sensation of bottomless. So everything that's horrifying, right, that makes us have a version of, oh my God, that is way too big. I was speaking earlier about accessing these feelings from larger aspects of consciousness, but because it's one consciousness, the whole system is processing itself on all these levels. So when we feel bottomless grief, to have some inner sensibility or capacity to stay steady with bottomless grief, or to stay steady with unbearable, or all these things that are just so painful. When we meet them as sensation and as a color of God and are willing to be that, they're doorways. They're doorways to open up to, an exquisiteness that is what you are and always have been. Okay, I'm talked out for the moment. It all came out. So I would just love to hear if there are questions or comments or sharings from your own experience or wherever you'd like to go with that.
I just came in again and I heard the bottomless pain. Sometimes the bottomless pain is really bottomless, or it feels endless. There might be an opening somewhere, someday. But if the conditioning or whatever happens is just so thick, it goes on and on and on. And it seems like there's no way out. And yeah, there are like all these puppets, but then more stuff comes in. And then more stuff comes in. And it's like, I can't handle it. I can't handle it anymore.
So there are a bunch of different directions we could go with this. So one is you can't handle it. Great, don't. Right, you can't handle it. So there's a doorway there of surrendering through the I can't to open up to something that's larger. Another place to go with that is, I'm not sure what point you came back in, being with the bottomless is just a frequency. It's just a frequency that feels like it's bottomless. So I'm not talking about collapsing into the bottomless pit and swimming around in it and not being able to see anything other than that. I'm not talking about that. So I'm speaking about being with, let me say this differently. There's infinite truth in everything. So the on and on and on and on and on, that's infinity. So all of these flavors are going to have some story in it and truth in it. Mm-hmm. When I was resting with the sense of pure, I don't even remember if it was pure hatred or pure evil, but I was resting with one of those in myself and resting with like, great, how's this gonna work with that? And just surrendering through, like if everything is God, that's God. It has to be. So there was just a surrendering and staying steady in that complete, total, obsolete lack of light that wasn't the dancing, divine, pregnant dark. It was evil, and so in the willingness to stay steady with it, what came forward was that it was pure. It was pure evil. I was like, oh, it's pure. And that was where the falling through was. So there's like divine truth in everything. So this endlessness, right? If you can be with the made up fabric and then what's true, it's going to appear in anything because it has to.
But then there's more. Because the experience the last few years, and more specifically the last year and a half, is just, it doesn't end. I mean, there's always something else and something, and there's like no respite and no, and then outer circumstances are mirroring all of that, and it's like fucking hell.
So here's another surrender place, the not ending. The not ending, there's the mind framing its experience of this stuff doesn't end, it doesn't end, it doesn't end. Right? There's a doorway, so I'm not talking about having the storyline start to make sense. I'm talking about surrendering through the story into where the story's arising out of. A deeper truth. So that feeling of not ending, that's a place to surrender through.
I've been doing that somewhat, and then I find more. Seriously.
Yeah, well, so again, here's...
too much trauma in my life, and it's just horrifying.
Let me just be quiet for a minute. So if there's it depends on what where the interest is. And I think this is true for everybody, right? Where we keep, there's something that the story gets us, right? So if staying with the story of it doesn't end, it doesn't end, it doesn't end, there's some way that story serves and lets one off the hook for something else. This is true for everybody.
I've been through that. I've already let go of that. It's gotten to a point where I'm not married to any stories anymore, as far as I can see.
So the part about things, the story, things just keep coming and coming and coming, right? Isn't that what you were saying was happening?
Yeah, difficulties and just very difficult things that are happening in my life, and that I know are coming back for me to meet them at different levels. And they're in some ways mirroring, very early childhood stuff. But now they're bigger, obviously, and there's just like no place to turn to almost, and it's just, I've had enough.
So all of this is love. All of those things that keep coming at you and coming at you and coming at you are love happening.
Love.
Yes.
Do you want me to answer what came to my mind?
You're probably going to swear at me.
The first thing I thought was bullshit.
Uh-huh. So the multiple chemical sensitivity that I had, that I couldn't buy new clothes, couldn't open phone books, couldn't read the newspaper, that was love. Lyme disease that put me on my butt for years, that was love. Like all these painful, brutal things are love happening. So I'm not just talking out of my butt, right? It's been my experience. And so things are going to keep, the story is going to keep coming and coming until it's done. And it is love happening.
Well, I don't know whether it's love or not. That's not right. I mean, there's love on the other side of it. I get that. But I can't do it anymore.
So this goes back to there are multiple doorways here for you to surrender through. One is that you can't do it. The I that can't do it, you can surrender through that. Give up.
I've done that. I keep giving up every day. And then it's like I kill myself? Or I don't know.
So I'm not sure what you're actually asking of me, right? In terms of the surrender place, right? I certainly would not recommend or encourage you killing yourself. So that...
When we're talking about surrender, that's one way you can surrender. If nothing else works. I mean, I'm not saying that's what I'm going to do, but sometimes I feel like that's the only way. I mean, it's beyond pain, beyond painful.
It's not about taking your life, it's about surrendering the part of consciousness that's contracted.
I don't know that a person can handle that much suffering. It's not pure evil in this case. It's pure, I don't know how to call it.
So I don't know that I can help. You know, I mean, in terms of part of what we're with is here today is, you know, the topic is about this surrendering. And I'm not speaking about a surrender of taking one's life. I'm not speaking about that at all. But on the inside, the places of identity that are constricted can feel that way. It can feel like, yeah, you know what I was saying, you know, feeling unbearable or feeling this bottomlessness, that those are qualities of consciousness that we get to experience, and that when we believe them, they can feel completely overwhelming. And I'm speaking about being present with those different experiences that happen in a way to use them as a doorway into truth. So I'm not talking about believing the experience of them in a way that we make choices based on feeling like they're real, that they really are bottomless. The experience is that they're bottomless. And when we're able to recognize that everything is divine, or if we believe that strongly enough that it allows us to use these things as doorways, then they can be used that way as an entry point into something else. So in my own experience of being with unbearable, I was with it. It's like, how can you bear it? It's actually unbearable. How am I supposed to stay steady with this experience of unbearable? And then the whole thing shifted. There was this realization of, oh right, unbearable is just like jealousy or playfulness or grief, or it's another quality of experience.
I think where I'm stuck is, you know, I hear people tell me, I don't know how it was for you, but I hear people say, well, I was like that for 5 years, or I was like that for 6 years. And I was like, forget it. I can't go through that for 5 years. I don't know how much more I have, and I don't know when the next shift is going to come, or if ever, but I'm like in the middle of the mud, and it's beyond painful and uncomfortable and everything else.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that, your vulnerability and the depth of it. And it may be that other people's sharings, as you hear other people share, that that other people's experiences and sharing may help you in your process. But each of those qualities that you're speaking about, the way I'm relating to it in this group is that each of those are fabrics. They're each qualitative experiences of the divine, and that any one of them is an opportunity to surrender through, no matter how painful it is. And that's the whole kind of point of these talks I've been doing, is to try to help support people to shift their relationship to those kinds of experiences, to use them as spiritual doorways. And I get that it's not easy. So, but again, maybe with other people sharing that something will click for you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
So, on that note, I think it might be useful to clarify what you mean by stay steady, because I could see how someone, could be in a dark place and kind of project onto that, stay steady, like stiff upper lip, British, sit on my cushion, and so maybe that could help break the logjam, or could just shed some light for all of us.
Yeah. I want to speak to another piece before I do that, which is the quality of stuckness. Because it's that same sort of illusion, that stuckness, we believe something's actually stuck. Oh, it's stuck, it's not going to shift, it's not going to shift. And that stuckness is just another flavor, it's another color. So what I'm really interested in is supporting the staying steady with something in a way that doesn't support the falling into that frequency and getting lost in it, but the staying steady that allows the full breadth of truth while you stay steady with that. So, and it qualitatively feels profoundly different. Profoundly different. Did that example speak to it enough? I mean, like for you?
I feel like...
No, okay.
So, personally, I feel like I know what you mean.
Okay.
But tracking your answer, I don't think it's very actionable.
Okay, great. So let me just be quiet for a minute and see. Well, I think there's two different ways that are coming to mind, that the way that I've done that in my own system. Sometimes I'll surrender into the immersion with the color, right, whatever that frequency is, to discover the divine doorway within it, right? So the bottomless grief. Let's see if I can, let me just be with that for a second. So it's tricky in a certain way because the whole thing is a game. It is all a complete game of mirrors. It is just a total play of consciousness playing with itself. So anything, anywhere can be surrendered through into infinite truth. So the staying steady for me has this quality of like an acupuncture needle on the inside. You know, it's like love. It's like love, where, I mean, it is love, but when, I don't know, the feeling coming forward is when you love something so dear, you scoop it up next to yourself and you're not going to let it go. You know, or your child is about to get run over by a bicycle or something and you scoop that up, right? There's like this steadiness, this complete commitment. It's like the sense of commitment to truth and love. And the game is that consciousness is at play with itself and is, in a sense, scooping itself back from playing out in the sandbox, getting dirty and muddy, and scoops itself back up of like, oh yeah, you're pure, you know. Right. So for me, in that inner sense of that staying steady, there's this profound commitment to truth and a profound commitment to love. So when I'm staying steady with something in that way, whether it's in myself or with someone else's sharing, right? There's a unerring, there's like no abandonment, right? That full, complete commitment. And so when I've been with any of these emotions coming up, there's that fierce commitment to love and truth, and that this too must be God. And resting as presence and stillness, God will reveal itself. Whether it's through bottomless grief or terror or abandonment or anything. Yeah.
I just love the, I just got a little different twist on it. I just loved how you said you just loved it, you just held it and was steady with it. Well, through my whole experience with self-inquiry and everything, and when those little things would appear in my consciousness, and I'd be like, what's that? What's that? Until, just, it's right, always right in front of you. So, and I'd be like, oh my God, really? So I would feel that, and it'd be, no matter how painful it was, would be with such intent, like, I don't care if I die, I want to know the truth. And you would, like, we're using these terms frequencies, and I just substitute that for feelings. For me, it was, I just felt it as intensely, like it was really there, right there. It was not me. I was just the feeling. I was just experiencing it, but it was not me. It was part of something else. And I was with some people a few months ago, and they said, isn't there any other way to do this that doesn't require pain? And I said, I haven't met anybody yet. I'm sure there must be somebody, but that just seemed, it's not an easy journey,
So I just want to speak to the pain part for a minute. Our instinct is often to move away from pain. And actually pain is the indicator to move closer. And I find resting as, I don't know what word to use. Words just sometimes aren't really so great. But resting as the moment, right? Resting as presence, resting without being in the past or the future in one's head, kind of protecting. Resting as that, when something rises that's painful, there's a movement towards it. It's like the instinct gets reconditioned in a way, as opposed to moving away from pain and creating protection and more holding and more and more layers. Resting is the moment, then pain comes up and love is happening. And love moves closer to the pain. Oh, what hurts? And that is then different than just pain. It's love happening. And then love and compassion are what's predominant. So something just came up for me this morning that was disruptive in my system. It was painful. Just the little bit of offness hurts. And so all that wanted to happen was inquiry and love and presence and sustaining. Because love is loving itself into truth all the time. And in that, exactly what I was speaking about, the thought would appear and be let go of, then the emotion that went with it would come forward and let go, and there'd be a place in the body, and the whole thing just unraveled. Because it hurt. So pain is love, right? It's calling attention to itself. And I also find that living this way, there's far less pain. There's far less pain because the pain comes from the resistance to something. So when there's no resistance, it just is what it is. And if pain shows up, it's because there's some treasure in there that actually wants to reveal itself. So, in another sense, it's like I get excited about when things come up like that, because there's a gift, there's a gem somewhere. Yeah, beautiful.
And it's kind of like, I know something happened a couple weeks ago, and my life was really busy for 3 days. And finally, I'm like, I gotta just sit and be with this and figure out what this is. So I set time aside to just sit and go into it and feel it and figure out what it was and just feel it and cry and just like, it's kind of like I just want to do this instead of carrying it around forever. It's like going to the dentist and getting your tooth pulled without Novocaine. It's like, if you don't, you're just going to have a toothache forever. So yeah, it's just, it gets, once you know that secret, get to that point, it's easier. It's still painful, but it's easier.
Yeah. 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 That's good.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You spoke about the function of mind, and I guess I wanted to talk about my experience of the different layers of thought, and how I'm seeing that some thoughts come up as like a derivative of a belief, and they manifest through the interaction of form to reveal their existence, to then be met with the non-existence of that reality.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's this other aspect of thought, which for me is very strong, and it's the power of creation or creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost just pure, the imagination comes from that creativity, so that it's almost just playing with the possibilities. Like, there's no belief in it, but it's like I create this possibility through my imagination, and I feel reality through that. It's almost like trying it on. And then the other thing is just pure knowing. A thought that comes that's a knowing. And I guess I'm just wanting to experience I'm wanting to share my experience in terms of like what's wanting to be more, like the difference between those, the different qualities of that thought energy.
Can you give me an example of the middle one? Because I can't quite feel what I'm not quite sure where you're, yeah.
I'm not sure if that one really exists or it's maybe belief, but it feels different because sometimes it's just an overlay that I can put on reality, like playing with a possibility. I don't even necessarily believe it, but when I'm in that, I create it and I feel it and I see through it.
You create it in yourself, or it gets created on the outside?
Yeah, on the outside.
Mm-hmm. So what's your question?
I guess I was just wanting to voice like these different levels of thought that I'm experiencing, and for me, I think it's just an exploration of the differences between those,
Mm-hmm.
deciphering. It's just something I'm working with and watching, but on the level of emotion, what I'm becoming aware of, it feels like the learning's almost backwards. Like when I enter an environment or I experience a person, like the feelings and the reality or the psyche and the maybe subconscious belief structure is experienced over here. Like I'm inside it.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like instantaneous, so I'm starting to learn, I guess, the point at which that happens, like that.
Mm-hmm. So I think just in kind of keeping with the focus of tonight, I would invite playing with surrendering through those functions, right? Surrendering through to where each of those functions arises out of. When we surrender into what's primary, what's manifest organizes itself and also can come into clarity. So as opposed to the mind trying to see itself through itself in the ways that you're speaking about it, I would invite that surrendering through the function to where the mind can't actually see. This is another important piece about the surrender part. Like when one is surrendering through those functions of consciousness, these aspects of mind, aspects of the functional parts of creation, when one surrenders through that, the mind, because the mind is created within all that, the mind actually has to completely surrender, and one passes through the doorway, into, it's the experience as this doorway or a pinhole or being sucked into the void, or, there's different sensations that come along with it, but that surrendering through that function into absolute nothing is what consistently is my experience. So, and what I hear other people speaking about too. So, I would just invite that surrendering there, and then the organization, the understanding that you're trying to find, it happens on its own. Yeah. But how many minutes over are we? We're not? Okay.
We're on time.
So, all right. So yeah, just to conclude that, right, that each of our suffering is, it's going to sound weird. Suffering is love, It's like when we surrender through into the truth, we discover that everything is love, and everything is love happening. And as we rest in the moment, that becomes more and more clear. And all of our conditioned stories that have been held on to come forward into the light of truth. And all the colors, like if the rainbow, if you added black and brown and gray and all that, all those colors come back into that truth of that purity, which they all are already anyway, which is what you are already now. So, thank you.